What, might we ask, is an alien? Or, to be more precise, what is a Gene Roddenberry alien? Most of the aliens in Star Trek are humans dressed up in costumes and prosthetics. Their costumed forms represent dramatic and possibly forbidden degrees of freedom within ostensibly normal people. The people watching, people receiving the story signal. In the Corbomite maneuver, Commander Baylock of the First Federation, who commands the gigantic, threatening Viserius, is first of all an evil monster, then a puppet, an inanimate object, and finally we're shown the actual Baylock, an affable-looking, boyish teen who just uses the puppet to appear threatening. In this deception, the puppet looks, at least to me, like the aliens depicted by Betty and Barney Hill somewhat earlier in that decade. That is, quite hideous and addicted to anal probing. Aliens in the early 1960s were always negative and harmful, and Star Trek provided transformations to make them friendly and even lovable. Some transformations in Star Trek present the possibility of greater degrees of freedom than others. The Horta, for example, is a silicon creature, a sort of living rock. At this stage in human civilization, Americans were just coming to understand the science of ecology and to embrace environmentalism, the political movement founded on it. A living rock symbolizes this transformation quite well. We are to become the earth, to know it, to see that it has feelings or at least experience. It is an extreme idea of life, to be sure. A similar type of rock magma being makes his appearance in The Savage Curtain, only in this case it has the power of speech, or perhaps uses telepathy, and seems to have a significant interest in the nature of human morality. It's somewhat strange a rock magma being would be interested in the human concepts of good and evil, but again, this is the dawn of the environmental age. The Earth has questions. On the other hand, some of the aliens are very human indeed. In Space Seed, which is episode 22, the aliens are genetically engineered ubermenches with superior strength and intellect, but are they human? Space Seed presents what might happen to human beings if they allow themselves to make use of technology in ways that purposefully alter human beings at the phylogenetic level. Not just to alter their ontogeny, their development or their life path, but their very DNA in order to create an improved model, a human being 2.0. Of course, we are now entering the stage when this has become a more realistic concern. What we learned from Star Trek is that these human 2.0 models were not acceptable in their own time, and they're not acceptable even in 2260 because their superiority causes an ego inflation or even madness and paranoia. I don't think that there is any obvious reason to believe phylogenetic changes would automatically cause an organism to become paranoid or a megalomaniac. So we are left with the conclusion that Space Seed is a lesson about changing humanity in unforeseen ways. Human phylogeny is still sacred at this point in time, and people believed, as I once did, that the evolution of human beings had stopped with the arrival of civilization. We know that is not true these days. In the city on the edge of forever, the planet is covered with the ruins of an ancient, long-forgotten civilization, millions of years old, but retains one living, immensely powerful presence, the Guardian, the half-machine and half-being, who has the power to send first McCoy and then Kirk and Spock back in time to 1930s Earth. So the Guardian, based on his physical form, his structure, which Spock says he cannot explain as doing what it does, basically is primality. He's art with a capital A. He's the origin. The Guardian is a physical representation of the first things. In fact, he describes himself as something like the Alpha and Omega, which is a religious reference, but his shape suggests that he is a primal structure. In fact, the Greek-looking columns around him do not fit with his form. His form is very, very old. You know, even though the city is old, he's way older than that. So the Guardian is a unique alien to Star Trek, the original series, and I can't think of anything like him elsewhere. You know, maybe something in Discworld. The first one in Babylon 5 is a lot more anthropomorphic. Primality creates time. Time is a function of the primal and comes into consciousness through relationship to the eternal. So, due to the Guardian's close connection to the primal, it makes sense he can call up and even connect to any point in time that he wants. We learn he can only present time in a particular way, which might be historical. At least Spock is able to record it somehow through his tricorder. The story which follows occurs with the all-too-human inhabitants of New York City. And the premise of the story, which is a change to the timeline, proposes an alternative future in which America fails to enter into World War II in time, and the Nazis win. So the story manages to blame pacifism with the destruction of everything, including the future Federation. Regarding the narratives where there is a timeline change, that plot device is used very, very often in science fiction, but what it means here and everywhere else is the same, which is a degree of freedom that we're supposed to be cautioned about. You know, it's like if your dad says, you know, son, don't smoke that, don't drink that, don't go out with that girl. So, of course, we always have to explore that possibility. So timeline stories are about degrees of freedom in much the same way that aliens are about degrees of freedom. I have not talked about the Romulans, the Vulcans, or the Klingons, but they come up in other parts of the series. Whenever there are enough cast represented on screen that we think of many, you know, that means we're in the presence of a crowd, that the narrative is trying to invoke the idea of a crowd for us. So the Klingons represent a crowd that is swarthy, bloodthirsty, cruel, and, you know, generally like Americans in terms of their hygiene and warlike attitudes. The Vulcans are a little different. They represent the intellectual people in society, the highly educated people. You know, it's like a society of college dons, you know, and their desire is to suppress emotion and be ruled by what amounts to a protocol to guide their decisions. You know, it's almost like Confucianism. And this is the problem of cloistered people, you know, or anyone who works in a bureaucracy, because the Vulcan notions of logic are very bureaucratic notions. Everyone in society is expected to act and perform in a known and recognizable way, a logical way. And when they don't, as in amok time, then it's surprising, but only momentarily until the reasoning is made manifest. I think the Romulans are basically bad Vulcans or pre-Vulcans, and they start out as being necessary for a war narrative. The Balance of Terror sees the introduction of the warlike Romulans, who are phylogenetically Vulcans, but their ontogeny is dramatically different. The Romulans are to the Vulcans what an alternative history of World War II might be like for the Americans watching Star Trek. The Romulans have adhered to a martial philosophy instead of embracing what I call Confucianism, or or Vulcan logic. Their Praetor demands just cause to make war with the humans, and weakness is something we dare not show to them. Sounds a bit like Trump.